Ned Stark's death didn't just shake the Seven Kingdoms, it broke something deep inside his son, Robb Stark. When Robb first heard the news of his father's execution, he didn't cry. He just sat there in silence, eyes empty, heart burning with anger. People thought he was being strong, but in truth, something inside him had died that day. Robb had always looked up to his father. Ned Stark wasn't just a lord, he was the Lord. He had honor, strength, and calm. Even when the world was falling apart, Ned never broke. Robb wanted to be like him. He believed that doing the right thing, being honest, and staying loyal would bring peace and justice. But when Ned, the most honorable man in the kingdom, was beheaded like a traitor in front of a screaming crowd just for doing the right thing, Robb learned the truth about the world. And it wasn't a kind truth. Robb didn't just lose a father, he lost his faith. He had marched south with his bannermen young, full of hope, thinking they could make a difference. At first, his army followed him because of Ned. "The son of Eddard Stark," they said. "He'll bring us justice." But when Ned died, the hope turned into rage. People didn't want justice anymore, they wanted revenge. And Robb, even though he was still grieving, was now their king. He never asked for it, he never wanted the crown, but it was forced on his head like a heavy chain. "King in the North," they chanted, but Robb didn't feel like a king. He felt like a boy pretending to be a man in a world that only respected blood and power. From that day, everything changed. Robb started making decisions not from wisdom, but from pain. He wanted to win, to prove that Ned's death wouldn't be in vain. But revenge and leadership are a bad mix. He began to trust the wrong people and ignore the right ones. He believed in loyalty, but the world around him only understood betrayal. Catelyn Stark, his mother, saw it happening. She tried to stop him. "You are not your father, Robb," she once said, "and this is not his war. You must be smarter than him, or you will die like him." But how could Robb listen? His heart was already buried in King's Landing, next to his father's headless body. Every battle he fought after that was not for the North, it was for a ghost, and ghosts make terrible kings. Robb didn't realize it, but his enemies, the Lannisters, the Freys, even the Boltons, they were watching. They saw the cracks in his decisions. They saw the fire in his eyes. The fire that wasn't leading it was burning him from the inside. One of the biggest mistakes he made came from a promise he broke, a promise made not by a king, but by a boy in love. And that broken promise would lead him right into a trap soaked in blood and betrayal. But all of this started with one sword swing in King's Landing. When Ned Stark's head rolled onto the steps, it crushed more than one man's life. It killed a future not just for Robb, but for the whole Stark family. And Robb, the young wolf, would soon learn, in the Game of Thrones, even wolves can be hunted. The North was cold, but nothing felt colder than betrayal. After Ned Stark's death, Robb tried to stand tall, but each day his shoulders felt heavier. The war was no longer about justice. It had become a dirty game of alliances, secrets, and blood. And in this game, Robb Stark was still learning the rules too slowly. He had won battles, yes, even outsmarted Tywin Lannister on more than one occasion. The Young Wolf, they called him, a name that made his men cheer and his enemies tremble. But behind that title was a 19-year-old boy pretending to carry a kingdom on his back, while his heart was still bleeding for a father who had died screaming truth in a world full of liars. One of Robb's earliest decisions after becoming king in the North was to ally with House Frey. Lord Walder Frey, old, bitter and dangerous, had offered troops in exchange for a marriage pact. Robb had agreed. It was a smart move, strategic, practical. But then came Talisa. She wasn't a lady from a powerful house. She wasn't someone meant for a king. She was just a healer, kind eyes and soft voice, who saw Robb not as a king, but as a boy in pain. She stitched his wounds and unknowingly tore open his heart. And Robb, blinded by love or maybe just desperate to feel human again, broke his promise to Walder Frey. He married Talisa in secret, thinking love was enough, thinking his honor was still alive. But honor had died with Ned. The Northern Lords whispered behind Robb's back. "A king who can't keep his word," they said. Even those who loved him began to doubt him. His mother Catelyn warned him again. "You are not fighting Lannisters alone," she said. "You are fighting with wolves who may turn on you the moment they smell weakness." But Robb didn't listen. He thought he could win with his heart. And then came the news. Theon Greyjoy, the boy who had grown up beside him like a brother, had betrayed him. Taken Winterfell, killed 2 children, burned their bodies. The North, Robb's own home, was in flames. And he was too far away to do anything. The young wolf was losing control, one piece at a time. Catelyn, in desperation, made a move Robb would never forgive. She released Jaime Lannister, their golden enemy, hoping to trade him for her daughters. But that too failed. Robb's army began to fracture. His bannermen, men who had once sworn to follow him into the fire, started doubting his leadership. What they didn't understand was that Robb wasn't just fighting a war. He was fighting grief, fighting the memory of a man who had taught him to always do the right thing, even if it got him killed. And Robb was trying to do that. But in a world where betrayal brought rewards and love brought punishment, Robb Stark was too much like his father, too noble for this world. The Lannisters understood this. They knew honor could be used like a leash. They knew a man like Robb could be lured and destroyed with words of peace and promises soaked in lies. And no one understood this better than Lord Walder Frey. When the invitation came for a wedding between Frey's daughter and one of Robb's bannermen, it seemed like a chance to mend things. An apology, a second chance. Robb took it. He shouldn't have. His mother's eyes were full of storm clouds. "It's too easy," she whispered, "too quiet." But Robb wanted peace. He wanted something, anything, to hold together the broken pieces of the North. He wanted to believe that not everyone was a liar, that not every pact was a trick. So he walked into the Twins with his new bride, his loyal men, and a heart still aching for justice. He didn't know he was walking into a grave, because when a king forgets the cost of broken promises, the debt comes due, and blood is always the currency. The air inside the Twins was thick, not just with smoke from roasted meats and wine, but with something colder, something darker. Catelyn felt it first. She wasn't laughing like the others, wasn't drinking or dancing. Her eyes moved across the hall, sharp and quiet, watching the Freys. Too polite, too eager, too many guards. Robb, lost in the joy of celebration, or maybe just pretending to feel it, held Talisa's hand and smiled for his men. She was glowing, her hand resting on her stomach, their child, a Stark yet to be born, a symbol of hope in a war full of ashes. But Catelyn's hands trembled around her cup. Lord Walder Frey stood at the head table, smirking like a spider fattened on flies. His voice rasped through the hall, fake warmth wrapped around poison words. The music played, the wine flowed, and everything looked like peace until the doors shut. With a heavy, final sound, then the music changed. It took Robb a second too long to notice. It wasn't the joyful tunes of a wedding anymore. It was the Rains of Castamere, a Lannister song, a warning. Catelyn rose slowly. Her breath caught. She turned to Lord Roose Bolton, sitting quietly beside her. His face was calm, cold. When she reached out and felt the chainmail under his fine clothes, her heart stopped. "Robb," she whispered, her voice cracking like ice. But it was too late. The arrows came first, whistling through the hall like death itself. Talisa gasped, then collapsed, blood pouring from her stomach. Robb screamed, catching her as she fell. His hands turned red. He stared at her face, then her belly, as if he could protect both with just his love. But love couldn't stop steel. The phrase turned on the northern men. Daggers in backs, blades to throats. It wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. Wolves slaughtered in a cage. Robb stood, trembling, drenched in his wife's blood. His face was blank, not from fear, but shock. The kind of shock that comes when your last belief in goodness is ripped from your chest. Catelyn grabbed a knife. Her eyes were wild. She snatched a Frey girl and put the blade to her throat. "Let him go," she shouted. "Let him walk away, and she lives." Walder Frey didn't even blink. He just nodded at Roose Bolton. And Roose stepped forward, looked Robb in the eye, and whispered, "The Lannisters send their regards." Then he plunged his dagger deep into Robb's heart. Catelyn's scream shattered through the hall, not just a mother's scream, but a woman's soul breaking into pieces. And then her throat was cut, and the room went still. The Red Wedding. That's what they called it later. Songs were never sung about it, because even the bards knew some things are too cruel to rhyme. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was the end of something. The end of honor. The end of hope. The end of the stark dream of justice. Robb's body was defiled. His direwolf's head sewn onto it, paraded on horseback as a mockery. "The king in the north." They laughed, as if wolves were just dogs and kings were just boys pretending. But what they didn't know, what they never understood, was that the north remembers. And the north does not forgive. Far away, in dark corners of Westeros, the blood spilled at the twins would become a fire. Arya would hear whispers. Jon Snow would dream of a throne buried in snow and bones. Sansa would learn the weight of survival. And even Bran, carried beyond the wall, would feel something in the wind, like a cry that refused to die. Because Ned Stark's death had broken Robb. But Robb's death, that broke the world. The silence after the Red Wedding didn't last long. Screams echoed through the north like ghosts' whispers in the woods, weeping in the snow. Lords who once wore Robb's sigil on their banners now lowered them, some out of fear, some out of shame. The king in the north was gone. The war for justice had ended not with peace, but with murder in the dark, knives during dinner, and wolves bleeding on stone floors. But wars don't end just because kings die. Sometimes that's when the real ones begin. News of Robb Stark's death reached Castle Black slowly, carried by ravens and broken travelers. Jon Snow, his half-brother or so he believed at the time, read the letter with shaking hands. His breath fogged in the cold air. He couldn't cry. Not yet. Not in front of the brothers of the Night's Watch. But inside, something hollowed out. Another piece of his already fractured soul vanished. He'd lost his father. Now, he'd lost Robb too. And though he never said it out loud, Jon had always believed Robb would fix the world. Robb had been the strong one. The one who led. The one who never questioned his place. If Robb was dead, what hope did they have? The North bled in more ways than one. House Bolton now wore the crowned traitors given power by the Lannisters. Roose Bolton, the man who stabbed Robb through the heart, now ruled Winterfell with his bastard son, Ramsay, a monster in human skin. Where Robb had brought order, Ramsay brought terror. Where Robb had honored the old ways, Ramsay burned them down. Villages were raided, women taken, men flayed alive and hung as warnings. The Bolton sigil, a flayed man, wasn't just for show anymore. It was a promise. The people of the North, broken and scattered, bowed their heads, not out of loyalty, but fear. Some prayed to the old gods, others to the new. Meanwhile, Sansa Stark, once a pawn in the Lannisters' games, found herself walking deeper into the nightmare. With her family gone, she was forced into a marriage alliance with the very house that had destroyed them, Ramsay Bolton. To the world, It looked like a peace offering, a way to unite the North. But to Sansa, it was a prison built of bones and silence. Ramsay wasn't a man, he was a storm with a smile. And every night, Sansa paid the price for the war her brother had started, and the betrayal that ended it. In her heart, she carried fire. She remembered her mother's warnings, her father's honor, her brother's love. All of it gone. All of it burned at the twins, buried under lies and Frey wine. But Sansa refused to break. Where Robb had tried to win with his heart, Sansa learned to survive with her mind. She stopped praying for heroes. She started becoming one. Far beyond the wall, even Bran felt it. In his strange dreams, half boy, half raven, he saw images of wolves being slaughtered, of halls dripping with blood, of Robb falling to his knees as the blade went in. He couldn't speak, couldn't scream, but he knew. The future had shifted. Something old and dark had been awakened, and the North was no longer just cold, it was cursed. But not everyone forgot. Not every Stark fell. Arya, small and wild, had been so close to her mother. To Robb, she'd been at the twins when it happened, only a stone's throw away, held back by the Hound. She had heard her mother scream, had seen the blood, and then she had felt something die inside her. Arya Stark had cried her last tear that night. What rose in its place was not a girl, but a blade with a name. Robb's death, they said, ended the war. But for Arya, it began a list of names carved into her memory like wounds. Frey, Bolton, Lannister, the Hound, even the gods. She didn't want peace. She wanted vengeance. And in the North, where the snow never forgets, vengeance grows like winter trees, slow, silent, and deadly. Snow had always been part of the North, but after the Red Wedding, it felt different, thicker, heavier, as if the land itself was mourning. Winter wasn't just coming anymore, it had arrived. And with it came silence, the kind of silence that follows after screams. House Bolton ruled from Winterfell now, but it was not the Winterfell the Starks had known. The warmth of hearths, the sound of swords clashing in training yards, the laughter of siblings, all of it had been replaced by the screams of tortured men and the chilling giggles of Ramsay Bolton. He walked the halls like a king, but fought like a beast. His father had given him power, land, a name, and in return, Ramsay gave the North fear. Sansa Stark, once the red-haired rose of Winterfell, now moved like a shadow in her own home. Her dress was fine, her posture perfect, but inside she was bleeding. Every night beside Ramsay was another night in hell. He played games with her mind, her body, her hope. And each time she tried to hold on to some small piece of herself, he broke it a little more. But he didn't break all of her. Sansa remembered what her mother had said. A true Stark bends, but never breaks. And so, while Ramsay played at power, Sansa played at patience, because she had learned one truth. The Game of Thrones wasn't about love or strength, it was about survival. And survival was something she had learned better than most. Elsewhere in the North, the small folk, once loyal to the Starks, now whispered in secret. Old men sharpened rusted blades. Mothers told children bedtime stories of wolves and broken chains. And though they dared not say it out loud, they waited for a sign, for a name, for vengeance. At the Wall, Jon Snow trained young boys who could barely hold swords. He wore the black cloak of the Night's Watch, swore the oaths, followed the rules. But deep down, the boy who had once idolized Robb Stark was crumbling. He had seen too much death, too many betrayals, and Robb's death still sat in his chest like a frozen stone. When Stannis Baratheon arrived at Castle Black, offering him titles and a Stark name, Jon hesitated. He could have taken it, could have become Jon Stark, Lord of Winterfell, could have avenged his brother and reclaimed the North. But he said no, because Jon still believed in duty, and that belief would almost destroy him. Meanwhile, across the sea, Arya Stark had begun her training in the House of Black and White. She wore new clothes, a new face, and tried to forget the name Arya. But names aren't easily erased, especially not when they're tied to blood. She served the many-faced god, learned to lie, to kill, to vanish into the crowd. But every night, before she slept, she whispered her list: Walder Frey, Roose Bolton, Ramsay Snow, Cersei Lannister, the Mountain, Ilyn Payne, and Robb. She never said his name out loud, but he was there, always there, in her dreams, in her rage. He had died a king, betrayed at a wedding, surrounded by liars. Arya didn't want justice anymore. She didn't even want peace. She wanted to undo the world that allowed her brother to die that way. And across Westeros, something was happening. Quiet things, small sparks. Brienne of Tarth, still searching for Sansa. The Blackfish raising men in the Riverlands, the Brotherhood without banners, moving through the woods like ghosts, all of them holding on to one memory. The North remembers. The Boltons thought they had ended the Stark name. They had killed the king, broken the army, burned the home. But what they forgot, what all the powerful always forget, is that names like Stark are not just names. They are roots. Roots buried deep in snow, roots that twist through stone and grow stronger in winter. Robb Stark was dead, but his death had planted something more dangerous than any sword: revenge. And revenge, in the North, is patient, cold, and always watching. Winterfell stood tall again, its towers rebuilt, its gates reforged, but it wasn't home anymore. Not to those who remembered what it once was. The halls still echoed, but not with the voices of children or the honor of House Stark. Now they echoed with screams, with chains dragging on stone, with the laughter of monsters. Ramsay Bolton wore his bastard's name like a crown now, but he ruled like a butcher. Every day, he reminded the North who its new master was. He flayed enemies, loyal men, and even family, just to prove he could. His father, Roose Bolton, watched in silence. A quiet serpent, pretending to control a viper that was already sinking its fangs into everything. But what Roose didn't realize was that he'd raised a weapon without a leash. And weapons don't wait forever. Meanwhile, Sansa Stark was done waiting. For too long, she had been a piece on someone else's board, a pawn passed between lions, monsters, and traitors, but not anymore. Not after what Ramsay did. Not after what she endured. She had lived through Lannisters, through beatings, through a wedding night soaked in terror, and still she stood. Broken bones heal, but broken pride, that sharpens. And one night, in the cold silence of her chamber, Sansa made a choice. She would no longer survive. She would fight. Theon Greyjoy, once a Stark, then a traitor, now just a ghost called Reek, wandered the halls like a whipped dog. Ramsay had torn him down piece by piece, but even dogs remember their masters. Somewhere in that broken body, Theon still remembered Winterfell. He remembered Robb, and he remembered the boy he used to be before betrayal, before shame, before Ramsay carved his name into Theon's soul. Sansa reached out to that ghost, not out of pity, but because she saw a flicker of the old Theon still buried inside. She reminded him of who he had been, of who they both had lost, of Robb, who had trusted him, loved him like a brother, and died because no one had his back. And slowly, that ghost started to rise. When Stannis Baratheon marched on Winterfell with his southern army, snow choked the land like a curse. His men froze in their tents, horses collapsed, and the gods did not answer his prayers. Stannis was a man of fire. The North only answers to ice, and Ramsay knew it. Instead of waiting for battle, Ramsay rode out with a small group of killers. In the snowstorm, they cut Stannis' army to pieces. Fast, brutal, no mercy. When the banners fell, Ramsay hunted the survivors himself, like sport. When he found Stannis wounded, crawling through the snow, he didn't offer surrender. He offered only a blade. And Winterfell remained in Bolton hands. But Sansa had already planted her seeds of rebellion. She and Theon escaped the castle walls during the chaos. Leaping from high towers into the deep snow, the fall could have killed them. But freedom meant more than safety now. She didn't care if she lived. She just refused to die there. Word of their escape spread like wildfire, and it reached the wall. When Jon Snow heard the name Sansa, spoken by a rider from the north, his world shifted. For so long, he had believed he was alone, that his family was dead, buried under red weddings and burning banners. But now here was proof. Sansa was alive. A Stark still walked. He had already given up everything to serve the Watch. He had bled for the wall. He had died for it literally. But when the men of the Night's Watch betrayed him, stabbed him in the dark, and left him gasping in the snow, something changed. He came back, not just to life, but with purpose. He was no longer bound by old oaths or dead dreams. The realm had taken his father, his brother, his innocence. Now it had tried to take him, and in return, he would take it all back. With Sansa by his side, he listened to what the North was truly saying, the old lords, the broken families, the scattered wolves. They didn't follow names anymore. They followed survival, and survival, in the North, meant rising with teeth bared. So Jon gathered them, wildlings, outlaws, forgotten houses, all of them bruised by war, betrayed by kings, burned by the lies of the South. And at the heart of it all was a name that still made hearts stir. Stark. Not Robb, not Ned, but the idea of them. The idea that wolves don't die easy. The banners of old houses fluttered again, not as proud flags, but as tattered memories. House Mormont, House Hornwood, House Marzen, forgotten names etched in northern stone, began to rise, one by one. Their numbers were small, their weapons old. But in their hearts, they carried one truth. The Boltons must fall. Jon Snow stood before them, not as a king, not even as a Stark, but as a man who had died once and come back to finish what his brother started. He didn't speak like Robb. He didn't wear a crown. But when he looked at his enemies, he didn't blink. And the North saw that. At his side stood Sansa, colder than the winter wind and stronger than she had ever been. She wore her mother's pride and her father's steel. When she spoke to the lords, she reminded them of the banners they once swore to. She reminded them of what they had lost, not just Robb, not just Winterfell, but their honor. She flayed your sons, she told one lord. Burned your harvests, she told another. She killed your king at a wedding, she reminded them all. And you still bow? They didn't have armies, but they had purpose. And that's more dangerous than numbers. Jon didn't want war he never had. But war had found him again. The only way to protect Sansa, to avenge Robb, to make the North safe again, was to face Ramsay Bolton head-on. So he marched, and Ramsay welcomed him. From atop the walls of Winterfell, Ramsay watched their camp with his wolfish smile. He didn't fear Jon. In his eyes, Jon was just another Stark bastard crawling from the dirt, thinking himself noble. He had defeated Stannis, broken Theon, tortured Sansa, and crushed every challenge without blinking. He believed himself untouchable. He would learn that belief was a mistake. The Battle of the Bastards wasn't just blood and steel. It was chaos. Ramsay's men had the numbers, the walls, the cavalry. Jon's side had desperation, loyalty, fire. The kind of fire that comes when everything else has been taken. When the horns blew and the lines clashed, it was not a battle. It was slaughter. Ramsay used tricks. He baited Jon. He used prisoners as shields. He ordered his men to form walls of bodies, pushing the enemy into a pit of death. Jon almost died, crushed under corpses, drowning in mud, blood in his throat. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move. He saw nothing but red. And then the gates of Winterfell opened, and the Knights of the Vale charged in like a storm. Sansa had sent the Raven. She had asked for help from Littlefinger, a dangerous man, yes, but one who owed her, one who loved power more than anything. And he came. He came when all seemed lost. Jon dragged himself from the mountain of bodies, gasping for air as Ramsay fled back into Winterfell. But there was nowhere left to hide. Jon followed him, broke down the gates, knocked him from his saddle. And then, in the very courtyard, where Robb once trained as a boy, Jon Snow beat Ramsay Bolton with his bare fists, blow after blow, not for glory, not for revenge, but for Robb, for the king who should have ruled. Ramsay was thrown into the kennels, locked in with the very beasts he had starved for sport. Sansa stood outside, watching. "They're loyal," he sneered. "They won't hurt me. But hunger doesn't know loyalty." Sansa didn't look away when the screams began, and as she walked away, snow falling on her dark red hair, she didn't smile, not fully. But something inside her had shifted. The North was theirs again. Winterfell stood, but the war wasn't over. Because, while Robb Stark's death had set fire to the North, its ashes were now blowing towards something even darker. The South. The Iron Throne. The storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. The North had been reclaimed, but peace was still a myth. Winterfell stood again, but it was not the same. The walls still smelled faintly of burning. The stones still remembered the screams. No feast could wipe away the blood that had once soaked the floors. No victory could bring back Robb. And in the heart of it all, Jon Snow stood alone. People called him a hero, the savior of the North, the man who had defeated Ramsay Bolton and restored House Stark. But he didn't feel like a hero. He felt haunted by the weight of decisions, by the blood on his hands, by the faces of those who died for a cause that still hadn't found justice. He had won the battle. But the war had never been just about banners. It had been about betrayal. And that poison still lived. Every time Jon closed his eyes, he saw Robb the way he used to laugh in the snow, sword in hand, full of life. He remembered how Robb rode off to war, not for power, but for honor, and how that honor was used to trap him, destroy him, humiliate him. Jon had fought to avenge him, but in doing so, he realized something far darker. Honor didn't win wars. Fear did, lies did, betrayal did. Robb had believed in the old ways, in oaths, in loyalty. He had trusted men like Walder Frey and Roose Bolton, and it killed him. His death had not been just a loss, it had been a warning, a brutal reminder that the rules of the South didn't belong in the North. Jon knew that now, and the North knew it too. But the South was still rotting. While Jon rebuilt the North, while the Stark banner once again flew over Winterfell, another war was rising across the sea. Daenerys Targaryen, a queen with dragons, a woman born in fire, marching with armies of freed slaves and Dothraki screamers, and she was heading toward Westeros, toward the throne, toward the same seat of power that had murdered Ned Stark and turned Robb into a warning. Sansa watched the ravens come and go from the Maester's tower, letters from the Vale, whispers from King's Landing, stories of the Dragon Queen. She knew this wasn't over. She could feel it in her bones. The Lannisters were still in power. Cersei now wore the crown like a weapon, her eyes darker than wildfire, her heart emptied by loss. Sansa had once dreamed of being a queen. Now she dreamed of peace. But peace would not come while the throne in the South was still soaked in Stark blood. So when Daenerys finally arrived with dragons above her and Jon Snow standing before her, the North watched closely, and Sansa, she questioned everything. She saw in Daenerys the same fire that once burned in Robb, the same belief in destiny, the same belief that honor and power could live side by side. And Sansa had learned the hard way that they can't. "You're just like him," she whispered once to Jon. "Robb." And it wasn't a compliment, because Robb had loved too deeply, trusted too quickly, believed too blindly, and he had died because of it. Jon wanted to believe Daenerys was different, that her fire could warm the world instead of burning it. But when she laid waste to King's Landing, slaughtering thousands in flames and fury, Jon saw the truth. Robb had died with a sword in his chest. But this was worse. This was madness in a crown. And once again, Jon was forced to do the unthinkable, to choose between love and duty, between loyalty and justice, between the living and the dead. He made his choice with a dagger, just like the one that killed Robb. But this time, it was Jon holding it. He killed the queen, and with her, he killed the dream. Not of fire, not of thrones, but of a better world. Robb's world. The war ended, eventually. Bran Stark took the throne not because he wanted it, but because he could carry it. And the North stood free, proud and apart, ruled by Queen Sansa Stark. She never forgot the Red Wedding. She never forgot Robb. And neither did Jon, who returned to the snow beyond the wall, a ghost in black, a man who had given everything name, crown, love for a world that could never repay him. But in the silence of the forest, with Ghost at his side, Jon looked to the sky, and maybe, just maybe, the wolves had finally found peace, not through power, but through remembrance